Now from CBS 47, a special presentation, the Central Valley's Hidden History, honoring Black history.
Good evening and welcome to Hidden History, a special presentation from CBS 47. I'm Anthony Bailey.
And I'm Alex Backus. For the past month, Eyewitness News has brought you countless stories honoring Black history. These stories recognize the sacrifices, contributions, and rich traditions of African Americans.
And tonight we've gathered some of those inspiring stories from here in the Valley and across the nation to share with you. We begin here in Fresno with the Tale of the Grapevine magazine that helped shape the local Black community. It even caught the attention of celebrities in Tinseltown, and it all started with a local man who saw a need to share a positive message.
It started out in Fresno Colony.
Educator Frank Johnson has always had an interest in informing people in his community. In the late 60s and 70s, he and others in the Black community felt there was a lack of a positive message in their neighborhoods, so he created the Grapevine.
We decided we're going to put out a magazine showing positive news. Maybe they could be role models for young people here in the city.
Through the years, the magazine's following grew. Later, it expanded its reach to Hollywood, garnering the interviews of the who's who in Black Hollywood like Lou Gossett Jr. and famed singer Dionne Warwick, even Bernadette Stanis of the famed show Good Times. The circulation caught the attention of local businesses who began to advertise.
Gog Shocks, J.C. Penney's, Sears.
Well, flipping through the pages of the Grapevine magazine, the images are amazing. It's hard to believe the man responsible for these actually made his living using a different set of tools in an operating room. Meet Dr. Fitzalbert Marius.
When you go with your loved one to the preacher, what do you say? Marry us.
At 96 years young, the former pediatric heart surgeon still possesses a radiant personality and an infectious laugh. Marius was born in Panama in 1922. After his residency at Stanford, Marius made history here in the Valley.
I was the first Black surgeon that ever appeared in Fresno, California.
So, how exactly does a heart surgeon end up creating art for a community magazine?
I actually became a surgeon by a flip of a coin.
Turns out that art was his first love. Had Marius's coin landed on the other side, he would have had a career as an artist.
Like I said, I never gave up my artist, and the whole back room was my art studio.
Wow. Inspiring pieces like these led to an invitation from Grapevine publisher Frank Johnson. Marius was all in.
The Grapevine magazine had great impact on the Black community.
Marius hopes that his story continues to inspire those that it reaches.
I was part of influencing Black people to be positively productive.
Now, Johnson has recently started to post those issues of the Grapevine magazine on Facebook.
And you can find a link to those on our website, yourcentralvalley.com. Still ahead, it has been called the Ellis Island for African Americans. We'll take a look inside Fort Monroe, a gateway to freedom for thousands of escaped slaves.
And later, a Valley native on one of the biggest shows in the country. We head to Hollywood for a behind-the-scenes look. Stay with us.
The Central Valley's Hidden History.
And welcome back. If you head to some of the most popular beaches in the mid-Atlantic, you'd likely find the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel.
Well, thousands of drivers use that stretch of the I-64 every day to get to Hampton, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach.
Well, just a stone's throw away from that bridge, you will find the historic Fort Monroe in Hampton. The former Army post played a major role in the Civil War, but it also served as the gateway to freedom for thousands of enslaved African Americans. And as Don Roberts shows us, at least one historian compares the fort to New York's famed Ellis Island.
The Ellis Island, New York, was the gateway to freedom for millions of European immigrants. They fled poverty and oppression for a chance to achieve the American dream. Well, one noted historian says there was another Ellis Island for African Americans.
In 1619, a ship with about 20 African captives comes into the Chesapeake Bay, lands at Fort Monroe, which was then called Fort Algernon.
Historian and author of the New York Times bestselling book 1861, The Civil War Awakening, Adam Goodhart.
So slavery, American slavery began at that spot, but American freedom also began at that spot.
Goodhart says there were about 4 million enslaved people in the U.S. in 1861 when the Civil War broke out, and in May of that year, a pretty remarkable thing happened that opened the floodgates to freedom at Fort Monroe.
It really started with 3 very brave young men, Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shepard Mallory, who were enslaved men in the Hampton Roads area. They had been conscripted, forced basically, into providing labor for the Confederate Army. They escaped, they took a rowboat, and they rowed across from Sewell's Point to Fort Monroe. And they came to the fort and presented themselves to the Union sentries and asked to be sheltered.
Shortly after Baker, Townsend, and Mallory made their way through those gates and were given asylum here at Fort Monroe, the word spread like wildfire, and within months, hundreds of escaped slaves made their way to the fort and were also given asylum. They were declared contraband of war. The word continued to spread, and shortly after that, thousands of escaped slaves found their way to Fort Monroe and settled in Greater Hampton. History professor Bill Wiggins says being declared contraband meant they were still considered property, and they were put to work for the Union Army in the fields wherever needed until emancipation in 1863.
We know that there were rapes that took place here. Rations were very scarce. Individuals were taken advantage of. That's the other side of the story I want to focus upon. But it ultimately was freedom's fortress.
Pamela Holly of Portsmouth says her family traced her great-great-grandfather to the contraband camp at Fort Monroe.
His name is Robert Langley Brooks. He met his wife here, who attended the Butler School.
Ben Butler was a lawyer. He collected every single scrap of paper. So within this collection of papers are actually for example, interviews, transcribed interviews of when Butler and his subordinates are interviewing people, enslaved individuals coming through the lines. These papers include names.
Names that historian Robert Kelly at Fort Monroe says could uncover hidden history. I'm Don Roberts reporting.
The superintendent of Fort Monroe National Monument says the park will recognize the contraband history with a week of activities coming up in May.
And Fort Monroe is planning to open a new visitor center in August to pay special tribute and join in the commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans in the U.S. Still ahead, what is the state of education for our local African American students? We sit down with a local trustee for her look at the road ahead.
The Central Valley's hidden history.
Well, education, of course, is one of the really kind of guiding themes of our hidden history stories this year, and also within the African American community. So joining us this morning is newly elected trustee Keisha Thomas. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you in studio. Congratulations, of course, on the election.
Thank you.
And you've got a couple of years worth of a journey ahead for you. Talk to us about what it means for you to be in that seat, first off, and where you want to see things go from here.
I think this is a very important role. Not only as an African-American female, but as an educator, period, and a parent. I would like to see us being the best school district in California. We need to be #1, and I won't take anything less.
And Fresno Unified's had some challenges over the years. Of course, we both kind of come up in the area and come up through the educational system. So obviously, there were examples that you could be excellent, you really, and come through Fresno Unified. What are some of the things that you'd like to see happen here in the near future as far as students go?
Right now, I think our student achievement is one of the most important parts. Our test scores, our African American students are falling behind. We have some programs that are very good for that. We have the African American Advocacy program, which we call A4, and that's through Wendy McCulley, and she's doing a phenomenal job. She did a program this summer, and we were actually the best in the nation in growth. So those are the types of things that I want to see in our school district.
And you've got a 4-year term here.
I do.
Let's fast forward 4 years from now. What do we want to be saying about your stay in office as a trustee or your first term as a trustee? What would you like to see people say about it?
That it was great, and that Fresno Unified is better, and that we have growth, and that our students are happy. and our parents are able to advocate for their kids.
We're taking a little time, obviously, to highlight some African-American achievement and people here in the area that have really kind of made a mark. What is it that you hope those little girls in the class that see you all at the board meetings or see you all making visits, what do you hope you inspire in some of those really young girls out there?
Teaching them that it can happen. It can happen. As a little girl at Martin Luther King Elementary School, I would have never thought that I would be sitting here with Anthony Bailey. It can happen, and you have to work hard.
Well, I really thank you for coming down and taking some time to kind of share your vision with us. Of course, if you'd like to learn more about what the board's going to be doing, you can head over to our website, yourcentralvalley.com. Keisha, thanks so much for taking a little time out for us. And you guys stay tuned, we'll have more coming up.
The Central Valley's hidden history.
Law enforcement agents take an oath to protect their community, but throughout history, we have seen mistrust between certain groups and the police. Well, there's a museum in Washington, D.C. hoping to strengthen relations by highlighting the history of law enforcement and having open dialogues about its future. Here's CBS 47's D.C. Bureau reporter Bree Jackson.
This badge, these sunglasses, and this nameplate belong to a pioneer in law enforcement and civil rights. Lucius Amerson was the first African-American sheriff elected in the Deep South since Reconstruction.
Before that, a largely African-American population in Macon County was not able to vote for their sheriff.
Rebecca Looney is director of exhibits and programs at the National Law Enforcement Museum. She says Amerson was an Army veteran who became sheriff of Macon County, Alabama in the late 1960s following the passage of the Voting Rights Act. She says many saw his election as a sign of progress for Black Americans fighting for equality and against police brutality.
It's a big step forward. I mean, we say that law enforcement needs to reflect our communities.
The museum uses audio and video exhibits to document how Sheriff Amerson worked in his community to improve relations between deputies and majority Black populations they served. While in office, he vowed to enforce colorblind police tactics.
What I mean by that is that everybody will be treated according to the law and no one will be mistreated, no one will receive brutality or unfair type treatment.
Lucius Amerson's story represents a defining moment in law enforcement history. Today, police departments nationwide acknowledge that maintaining and recruiting a diverse workforce is still a challenge.
If law enforcement isn't of the community, then it's not really fulfilling the role that we, as a democracy, have set it to fulfill.
Recent headlines have focused on the Black Lives Matter movement and the lack of trust between police and the public. Craig Floyd, CEO of the National Law Enforcement, says he hopes the museum can play a part in easing those tensions.
We're going to have thoughtful, important conversations between the public and law enforcement right here in the National Law Enforcement Museum.
The $100 million museum honors those who protect and serve. The facility features thousands of artifacts, including firearms, body armor, and equipment used for public safety.
I think for most people it'll be a real eye-opener.
Interactive tools and exhibits highlight community policing in cities like Charleston, South Carolina.
The U.S. Marshals Service.
Through programs and open dialogues, Floyd says organizers hope to restore and increase trust.
We realize that there's great hope for the future, that law enforcement and the communities that they work in are doing incredible things to try to strengthen that bond between police and the public.
The museum hopes sharing the stories of Sheriff Lucius Amerson, as well as the stories of men and women of all races who have given their lives in the line of duty, will help visitors better understand the vital role diversity plays in keeping our communities safe. In Washington, Bree Jackson.
Thanks, Bree. Coming up from the Valley to the Talk, we sit down with comedian, actress, and television host Cheryl Underwood to talk about how her Fresno roots helped shape her successful career.
The Central Valley's hidden history.
Well, the highlight of any athletic career in track and field, of course, is making it to the Olympics, and we are fortunate enough to have our own local Olympian right here with us. Maxie Parks, how are you this morning?
I'm doing just fine, Anthony. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. We're really excited to get a chance to talk to you about, of course, your history here. And it's not every day that you get a chance to talk to somebody who's performed and competed in the Olympics. It's pretty special to have somebody from the African American community. And as we celebrate Black History Month, talk to us about your journey. When did you first get started in track and field?
Well, I went to West Fresno Elementary. Back then it was called Ivy Junior High and Fresno Colony Elementary School back then, but it's now known as West Fresno Elementary. Watching some Olympics on the TV in 1960, I saw two great athletes competing. And one of the things that the announcer said was that these two athletes are competing in the decathlon. And for what they're about to accomplish, their names will go down in history, that they will be remembered forever.
Wow.
That was what caught my attention, the fact that you could do something and your legacy or your name can be recorded or you can be documented in history.
So what grade did you start? Like, how old were you when you first got started with track and field here in the Valley?
When I was in elementary school, I did go out for what we used to call the West Coast Relays. Back in the day, they used to have the West Coast Relays. And my elementary school had tryouts, and I tried out for the West Coast Relays. They were going to run in the 200 or even the relay. You know, they ran the elementary schools kids in relays events, not necessarily open events.
At that point in time?
5th grade.
So fast forward to 1976. Talk to us about what it's like. You're standing in this Olympic arena there in Montreal. What goes through your mind?
Well, you know, we had a large group in our Olympic team when you think about not just the track and field, but all of the different sports. And you have so many of you trying to get autographs, you're trying to mingle with other countries, other athletes you've known and competed with in other places around the world.
So if you had to share words of wisdom with some young athletes out there watching right now, what would you advise them to do? What would you encourage them to do?
First, I would say you have to have a goal and a plan. You have to want to accomplish something, and you have to be willing to work hard to achieve it. You can't let people steal your dreams away. You can't let someone tell you that you can't do it, because I had a lot of people tell me I couldn't do it. I remember going to a sports writers luncheon down in Southern California, and the sports writer asked me, he says, who do you think will be on the Olympic team this year? And I said, well, I can name 2 people for sure who's going to be on the Olympic team. And he said, well, who's that? I said, well, Maxie Parks is going to be one, and Benny Brown, my teammate, is going to be the other.
And you all made it.
And we both made it.
All right. There's, of course, a true testament to planning and placing your goals out there and going and achieving. Maxie Parks, I really appreciate you coming down and sharing your story with us. Of course, you'll be able to find more info about his journey on our website, yourcentralvalley.com. Well, from an Olympian to a comedian, Cheryl Underwood has made a name for herself on one of the biggest talk shows here in the country. Each day she's seen on hundreds of thousands of TV screens as co-host of The Talk. But what you may not know is that she was raised right here in the Valley. Here's an exciting look at her journey to Hollywood's biggest stage. As co-host of The Talk, Cheryl Underwood has made her mark on daytime TV. Whether it's discussions about today's hottest topics or performances by music's biggest names. Cheryl is here for it. On a recent visit to the set of The Talk, we were given exclusive access behind the scenes. After a planning meeting, we had time for a quick meet and greet.
Brother Anthony, baby. You got it, Brother Anthony.
Next, we were off to the studio, and in case you're wondering about her sweater, yes, we visited during the holidays.
Monday, Eve, and once the family back together.
From the moment we sat down, it was clear Underwood is very humble about her success. She has fond memories of her formative years in the Valley.
I grew up in Fresno. Blackstone is where you go and you get your, and when shopping to get your East outfit at Gottschalk's.
Underwood attended Atwater High School and Fresno City College, and later enlisted, being stationed at Travis Air Force Base. She went on to cut her teeth in comedy right here in the Valley.
My first contest professionally was the funniest woman in Fresno.
So, how does a girl go from stand-up in the Valley to one of Hollywood's biggest shows?
This is one of those fairy tale stories.
A fairy tale Underwood says almost didn't happen. She thought the call was a prank.
I didn't believe that somebody was actually calling me, wanting me to come take a meeting. 4 days later, I had a job that I still have to this day.
Wow.
Yep.
What a fantastic journey. And for the full interview with Cheryl Underwood, you can visit yourcentralvalley.com. There's also a collection of stories there from our Hidden History series. And we would like to thank you for joining us again this year on this journey through hidden history.
We hope you've learned something new about the history surrounding our valley. Until the next time, good night.